about what inspired you to become an artist.
Yeah, the short answer is I became an artist by accident. When I was in junior high school. That was the time when I was like a teenager. I kind of got into rock music, like most boys my age, I guess at the time. And then in university, I started making music and kind of got more into experimental music, avant-garde music. And by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was kind of experimenting with different formats of making experimental music. In addition to performing or doing live performances of improvised computer music, I was also making things that kind of fit more into the domain of contemporary art. One of my earlier works, it's called Guilty Pleasures, and it's just a listening party where I would, play the role of the moderator or facilitator, and in the context of a listening party, everyone just comes up to talk about musical guilty pleasures that they have, songs that they really enjoy but are really embarrassed to confess to liking. Kind of like an alcoholics anonymous meeting. So people confessing to their sins and then playing the music for everyone to listen to. And then I also started to work with sort of different kinds of media. Again, one of my earlier works was essentially just setting up different electric guitars tuned to open tunings and put through delay pedals or different kinds of pedals, and making a lot of plastic color balls and ping pong balls available for the audience to throw at the guitars. And depending on the hits and misses of the balls, you just create noise or music or silence. And these things just kind of grew organically from there. So I just kind of took what I had, knowing, from what I had read and listened to and read about in experimental music, and just kind of went into the art world. I guess I kind of found also a really interesting kind of bridge or link in conceptual art or fluxes of performance art, which kind of crossed over into different kinds of media.
Mm.
And for me, that was interesting. Yeah.
And did you feel like there was something missing when you were making music that you were able to find as you started crossing over through this Guilty Pleasures project and others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I'm quite aware of is that the so-called music world and the so-called art world, they're quite different in how they operate. I mean, obviously in many ways, but I think as industries, like economically, they work in really quite different ways. In art world, I think there's a lot of resources, a lot of decision making, a lot of power is actually concentrated in the hands of very, very few people. And I think where music or popular music is concerned, fans have a lot more power. It's really more bottom up. And then your sources of income are also a lot more widely distributed. I do what traditionally musicians would be selling records and touring and doing concerts and selling merchandise, and you're selling it to like thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And in the art world, it's you're working with museums or galleries, and your primary what's the right word for it, that your primary consumers are collectors. And there aren't so many around. So just in terms of how things are produced and for whom, it's just really different. But yeah, back to your question, I think yes, very big differences. I think music appeals to me more on an emotional level, and really, and strangely, maybe more on a formal level. And for art, I think I tend to be more drawn towards things that tend to be simple or clever or efficient. And yeah, that's kind of the difference for me. And you know, when I'm making art, I kind of miss making music. When I'm making music, I kind of miss making art. But in some of my projects, I'm kind of able to bring them together in a way that sort of, you know, that satisfies my needs.
Well, in terms of thinking about simplicity or specific logics, maybe that's a nice segue to talk about one of the two works in the exhibition, Backwards Bach. So for this piece, you taught yourself a piece of music on the harpsichord. You taught yourself how to play the harpsichord, and then you taught yourself how to play the piece of music backwards. So should we watch maybe just one clip? It's about 2 minutes long, and then we can dive in to talk about this piece.
Sure.
And thank you for everyone's patience as we all learn how to screen share together.
So you want that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
So I can just start playing whenever I want.
Okay.
Okay.
Cameras rolling. We're ready.
So to start out, can you tell us a little bit about why Bach, why this piece of music, and why the harpsichord?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I have to confess that, you know, as a Singaporean child growing up in the 80s, I did have some private lessons. Actually, that was with the organ, which is in principle not so far away. But in terms of the mechanics of the harpsichord, it's just really different, because the action is quite different, and you really have to lift your fingers up after you depress the keys. But I think if we've got time, it might be interesting to just kind of continue playing the Backwards Bach piece, just so that the audience can get can have a listen to what it sounds like backwards. Because I think one of the audience members has just posted a question. Could you sight read it backwards, or did you recompose the music? Should I answer this now, or
Sure.
should we wait for a little bit? So to answer this question, I actually I sight read it backwards, which is completely which is really difficult to understand, and which wasn't a path that I had envisaged for myself. So the reason for me choosing this piece was that I just conceptually in my head, I just wanted to make a piece of music that I just wanted to perform a piece of music backwards. And I started looking at Bach because I knew that his music was really symmetrical. So, you know, a lot of counterpoint, a lot of symmetry. And when I heard the Well Template Clavier, you know, the C major prelude from the first book, I just thought, okay, maybe this is something that's kind of something that I could manage with my non-proficiency in playing. But I did actually also work out like a reverse version, and the way that I worked it out was simply just to reverse the chord progression. So I just played. I played from the last bar back to the first bar, and I reversed the arpeggios in terms of, you know, in the original they're ascending, and then in the backwards piece they're all descending. So I'm just holding the top two notes and then playing the bottom three, as opposed to the original where you're holding the first two at the bottom and then playing the top three. Yeah, so I guess for everyone to understand, probably a good time to show the backwards version of the video now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Position. Egal, Moment. Jetzt.
Still sounds like Bach.
That's what's really amazing to me. Is it
Kind of.
because is that what you expected to find out?
Yeah, in a way, yes. It's you have many of my works are also experiments in a way. It's just about, you know, trying to answer this question, which might be particularly fascinating to me in a very nerdy way. Yeah, so I was just like, well, what happens if I play this piece backwards? You know, this is kind of what it sounds like. I did kind of imagine that it would sound like this, given, you know, like I said, the symmetry in the music. So to answer the next question, did you play the notes in reverse order or just the measures? Yeah, so both. Yeah, as you could hear in from the video itself. Yeah.
Do you find, as I am starting to guess from the folks in our chat, that your work attracts music aficionados as much as it does art lovers, or that you're kind of bringing out the love of music and music expertise in the art lovers who are already in the room?
Yeah, it's a tricky question for me to answer. My guess is that part of my mission actually as an artist is to, I would say, would be to translate knowledge from different spheres to one another. So, for example, between music and art, that would be one. That would be kind of like two domains that I'm trying to connect. But at the same time, also, I guess things that can be more conceptual or more academic or more intellectual, and finding ways to make them more accessible for visitors or for the public. One thing that I'm particularly interested in is actually amateurism and fandom, and the kind of dedication that often arises from such practices. It's really interesting because I kind of got into modular synthesis maybe about a year ago or something, and this is just quite amazing how much knowledge is just being shared, and it's kind of a movement that I would say has got to do with really like synth designers being really innovative, but at the same time also users or performers or just hobbyists contributing so much to knowledge in terms of sharing what everyone's just doing on their own.
And so in terms of those logics that you were talking about and setting out a question to try to answer, do you feel like you're trying to put yourself into a position of knowing less about music than you did before, to always be an amateur in each new scenario?
Yeah. I think you got it really, sort of really hit the nail on the head. It's interesting for me. I realized that I tend not to want to repeat myself in terms of making artworks. I'm just not very good at. I mean, to be very honest, I would very much love to be like a painter, which is going into a studio and just keep painting 8 hours a day or something, and I've got like 20 new paintings, put them in a gallery, and it's great. But it's just not quite the way I work. So yeah, it is about just continuously learning. It's interesting, and it's fun for me. Yeah, so both as a way of learning and also to challenge myself, and just also going out to make friends.
Speaking of new friends, should we talk about Parts and Labor, the second work in the
Yeah.
exhibition? So for this piece, I always call it a residency, but you were hanging out you spent 4 months, it was, in a piano workshop, learning how to take apart and then put back together an entire piano. Is there anything else? We'll play a few-minute clip, but is there anything else to add before we share the clip with the audience?
No, not really. I think we can watch the clip first.
Great. Maybe we'll pause it there for now. Can you tell us a little bit about what technically we were just watching?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, Parts and Labor was made in Berlin when I was doing my residency at the Künstlerhaus, and it was 2011 to 12, and I spent 4 months at a piano workshop. I actually approached quite a few, and because at that time I couldn't speak any German, so I had to do it through, like a translator or interpreter, and an intern working at the Künstlerhaus at the time. So we went around asking several piano workshops, and then only one of them kind of like gave us a sort of lukewarm response. They probably didn't take me quite seriously. Like this artist wanted to do a project like this, which was essentially, trying to be a piano workshop apprentice for 4 months. So basically what I did was I bought an unused or disused East German piano from the workshop, just there somewhere in the cellar, because they do refurbishment anyway, other than dealing really great pianos. And so I went in there regularly, I think on average 3 times a week, and the Klaviermeister, so the boss, if he's around, he might be around to just sort of show me what the next step in the process would be, and then if not, then one of his staff members, and you just come and then show me how to do something for literally a few minutes, and then they'll go back to to do their work, and then I'll for example, they'll be teaching me how to change a string, and then they change 1 or 2, and then I'll look at it, and then I'll have to do it for the remaining 200. So that was essentially the process. And then because I didn't have a particularly large budget, I had on different occasions different artist friends helping me to operate the camera, but most of the time I just kind of set up the camera, hit record, and then I just get on my with my work. And the end result really is just a video that compiles together all the different stages of refurbishing a piano from step 0 to the end. And I wanted with this work to literally get inside the piano, and sort of like I wouldn't say extract, I would just say create a situation for a certain kind of interaction to happen between a human, an instrument, as well as machines. So when you're working with a piano, there are really specific instruments for refurbishing and tuning the piano, and I think many of us actually have a piano at home, and some of us can play a bit, but like just literally getting into the piano and hearing what it sounds like on the inside. It's nothing particularly new in experimental music or avant-garde music. Like John Cage did a lot of work with prepared piano, and also contemporary pianists. But yeah, I guess I just thought that it might still be interesting for me as an artist to sort of do it as a video, for people to also look at the process. Yeah.
It seems like in both works you're looking at the mechanics of the music, right? The mechanics of composition and how it's organized and put together, the mechanics of the actual object.
Yeah.
But you were talking earlier about getting into synthesizers, and that when you were just starting out studying music, you were also making electronic music. Was there like this overwhelming desire to like touch a real object in space, or did you find that there were actually a lot of similarities between making electronic music, synthesizers, and maybe I'll call an analog piano?
Yeah, I think primarily these different things appeal to me, or fundamentally because I sort of look at them as systems and processes. If you're looking at modular synthesizers, it's really a lot of that. There's a lot of logic. There's a lot of setting up systems for things to affect one another, creating feedback loops, things like that. And I mean, when you look at backwards Bach, it's essentially just a loop that's continuously going, backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards. So yeah, I guess looking at processes, that's sort of interesting for me.
And what was it like to get to know the folks in the workshop? Have you found that folks who are on the kind of mechanic side or making instruments are different from musicians or different from artists, or that there's a shared love throughout?
Yeah, I definitely a kind of shared love for the instrument. I think whatever your proficiency is, and I mean, obviously they're all better than me at playing the piano, but everyone's really helpful. And me, unable to speak German at the time, and then not all of them being so good with English, but I really enjoyed going in sort of 3 times a week or something, and learning from them. And yeah, I guess it's no secret for me to say this, but like from what I remember, I paid the workshop like 1,000 euros, like 250 for the piano, and then like 750 euros for squatting in a room in the workshop for 4 months, which is extremely generous of them, I think. And then during that time, when I was shooting Parts and Labor and doing like my little internship there, I saw them building this really amazing, beautiful blue harpsichord, which they then sold to this castle, and which is actually the harpsichord that I played in Backless Bach. So yeah, I mean, the two works are also connected by circumstance in a way.
Do you often find the clue for your next work at some point and realizing the one that you're in that moment?
Sometimes, yeah, one thing does lead to another, but yeah, I also find that the way that I make things has kind of changed within the last 10 or 15 years. When I first started making art, I would say that I was quite materially challenged. Because I think it's almost like a situation that a typical Singaporean would face, because it's a very small country, it's a very young country, and I'd say that by and large, culturally, we tend to be more pragmatic. So parents generally wouldn't encourage the children to pursue musical or artistic careers. Even though everybody wants, most parents want their children to learn some music instrument. Like, oh, would you like to learn the piano? Would you like to learn the violin? And then if you tell your parent, I would like to be a violinist or a pianist, they'll be like, no, that's awful. That's like, why don't you consider law or being a doctor? So yeah, so that's one of the things about growing up in Singapore, and that I think the other thing is that we're generally not so good with using our hands in a way, but I think that is also tied to space. That's also tied to essentially historical and cultural factors. I think one of the things that's great about the US that there's actually really a lot of space. If you're a 12-year-old kid, you could be jamming in your parents' garage and setting up a band, or you might have space to paint. Like you'll be doing DIY. You'll be inheriting old radios from your parents or your grandparents. And in Singapore, you'll be more like, like as a kid, your one task as a child really is just to do well in school. And the expectation really is that you should be working somewhere in an air-conditioned environment, rather than just working with the hands. It's craft. It's just considered something that's not very sexy in Singapore. And like, craft in Singapore, I'm very sadly, is mostly outsourced. Whatever we can be buying, for example, like furniture, it's just not things that, woodworking, metalworking, these are just not really our area of expertise, although other Singaporeans might disagree.
Was that any part of the inspiration for the third piece we'll talk about, recorder rewrite for the Biennale?
Absolutely, yeah. To make like extremely laborious works that were very manual, I think these are kind of ideas that underline both parts and labor and backwards Bach, sort of time intensive, labor intensive, but also quite blunt and quite naive in a way. It's kind of inspired in some ways by, you know, like composers like Yang, draw a straight line and follow it, and the minimalists. Yeah, what I could do in my own capacity as somebody who is really neither art trained or musically trained, but really just as a fan.
Well, and you also tip your hand to the behind the scenes. I mean, everything about Parts and Labor is behind the scenes, but also in Backwards Bach, you can hear a friend or a coach or who is speaking in the background.
Yeah, I think for this version of Backwards Bach, I mean, just to offer a little bit of background for the audience. Backwards Bach, I usually show it as a 2-channel installation, where the forwards and backwards versions are screening either simultaneously or alternately, and you can project them on different walls, adjacent walls, opposite walls, different rooms. There's really a lot. There are different ways to play with the presentation. But for the Highland presentation, I've essentially edited a compilation of 6 pairs of the recording, so forwards and backwards 6 times, so making it something like 30 minutes long. For the audience to kind of sit through the whole process of me just like doing different takes while performing, and with some mistakes, minor mistakes, still left in the clips, because you know I'm not good at playing it, and when we shot it, we shot it 8 times actually, forwards and backwards, and I essentially just chose the best forwards and backwards takes to put them together. But
did you feel like you were, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Did you feel like you were trying to share the mistakes and the reality, but also the joy of learning how to do something like this, and the joy of making and the handicraft? Yeah,
I think it comes back to the amateur aspects of the work, which is to kind of expose the fact also that like I didn't quite want to just, you know, actually like just looking, me sitting through this, watching Backwards Bach, I don't really like seeing myself on screen. I don't like hearing my own voice. It's always a little bit weird and a little bit awkward for me. But yeah, I think it's really just to show that it's not perfect. It's not done by me. I'm not like I'm not Lang Lang, you know. I'm not a proper pianist, and this is a video that I've had help from people coming together to make this work. Yeah,
collaboration seems to be really important in everything that you do, and you know, both art and music can be either very solitary or very collaborative projects. Can you talk about how you choose your collaborators, and maybe say a little bit about your collaborators for recorder rewrite, and then we can show that. Talk about it.
Yeah, part of what I do involves collaborators. I mean, given the nature of the work, for example, if I'm making a video or a performance or something that involves the public to some extent, it's collaborative by nature. The good thing about, or the appealing thing about such projects is that I think they're really interesting situations that I enjoy, where you see energy being transferred, you know, from one person to another, and being shared, and it's just the warm fuzzy feeling that you get from like good teamwork, you know, in a way. But also because music tends to be a very communal experience anyway, and I think, you know, as with regards to how contemporary art has evolved, a lot of artists are also using participation as a way of making things which tend to be, I guess, maybe more interesting, or just finding new ways to make things. And as I think another reason why many of my work, some of my work is collaborative, is because I think in the beginning, when I first started making art, like I said, I didn't feel very confident. I was, I wasn't very good at material. I don't think I'm technically gifted in that sense. So I think maybe these projects were subconscious ways for me also to learn from other people, and just to see how other people looked at things, how other people did things. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So can you tell us, before I show the clip, who were the people that you were learning from or collaborating with for this project?
Yeah. For Recorder Rewrite, it was actually a really big crew. I would have to be honest and say that, so we worked with 20 children and a crew of 50. And what we did for Recorder Rewrite was to organize essentially a 2-day workshop for children to come together, and they don't necessarily have musical private music education, and they're not child actors as well. So it was really about getting a bunch of people, a group of children together to come and compose what I would call a mini symphony, a kind of a mini 4-part symphony based around the recorder, which has a really interesting or poor reputation for being an instrument, because many of us, I don't know what the experience was like, but I think many children around the world actually learn the recorder as an instrument in primary school, and it can be quite traumatic, because if you've got like 40 children in a class and they're all blowing on a soprano recorder at the same time, your ears are not going to like it. And in that sense, it was it's partly my attempt to it's like a rehabilitative gesture in some ways, but the closest people that I was working with on this project would have been the 20 children, but also the choreographer, my director of photography, and a musical director that I hired, because I really thought that the musical direction, the choreography, as well as the cinematography would have been really, really important. And yeah, so it was quite difficult as well, because we shot it with 3 cameras rolling at the same time, and I essentially kind of went there without a script. And you're working with 20 children, so it's kind of just a really unpredictable kind of premise to be shooting a film. But I have to say I'm happy with the results, and based on the feedback that I got from the entire team, I think they really enjoyed it too.
So let's dive into that clip.
What do you think is going to happen during the film shoot?
I don't know. A lot of camera. I also don't know. That's my first day.
Tenors have altos and sopranos have
So the title for your entire exhibition for the pavilion, it was called Music for Everyone. What did that title come from, and how does it relate to this particular piece?
Yeah, so Music for Everyone is it was the title for my exhibition for the Singapore Pavilion in Venice 2 years ago. And the starting point for the title actually, it's actually lifted from a series of music concerts that the Singaporean government, the Ministry of Education, were putting up from the late 70s to the mid 80s. A total of something like 350 concerts were organized by the government, and just based on the program, based on the contents of the concert, it was quite clear. Looking back, this is basically all research that I've been doing from the National Archives of Singapore, and you can see that the government had sort of three agendas. The first one is to use Western art music as a form of music syllabus for educating Singaporeans, and then there was also a lot of music that was focused on, or a lot of concerts that was done in celebration of local festivals, for example, Chinese New Year concerts, Deepavali concerts, Hari Raya concerts, for the Chinese, Malay, Indian people in Singapore. Singapore is a multi-religious, multiracial society. So there are Taoist, Buddhist, Christians, Hindu, Muslim people, and so that Western art music, local folk music, and then the third agenda, I think you could call it cultural diplomacy. So bands, school bands, military bands, coming from Southeast Asia, coming from Australia, New Zealand, coming from Europe to come to Singapore, choirs, brass bands, whatever. And so music as some form of cultural currency in that sense. So when I did a show in Venice, I thought it would be interesting to think about the idea of music for everyone, because I think in this case with the concerts, it was really something that the Singaporean government did out of good intentions, although it was clear what the aim was, what this whole program was about. And with the artworks that I showed in Venice, they pretty much all revolved around the idea of creating music from the ground up, or creating art from the ground up. So in addition to something like recorded rewrite, it was just made with children, really with a lot of their input. What I produced from the studio itself was also really, really simple, and made recorder sculptures with the recorders that the kids used. I just took them apart and then I stacked them into different recorder sculptures, kind of like if the children themselves would have made sculptures, they would kind of look like this. Mm-hmm. And it's really just like balancing them, and in a way, kind of a microcosm of what sculpture is. So yeah, maybe it's that thing about me as well. So it's like if I'm making a sculpture, I'm kind of thinking about what sculpture really is, rather than to go out to make this really, really huge thing that I probably can't do anyway. And we showed a lot of music manuscripts as well. So basically just printed music scores. The blank ones, which we worked with by cutting, folding, pasting, and just kind of like making 3-dimensional or 2.5-dimensional things out of, with a very strong element of, I would say, improvisation, play, experimentation, just seeing what you get out of certain very basic methods of working with paper. Yeah.
We have a couple of nice questions also from the audience. One specifically about this piece, whether the kids seem to enjoy the more open way of playing. I think also remember all of us, or many people, have a memory of the sound of all of those soprano recorders playing at the same time, but whether they enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think it was definitely different for some of the kids. I in Singapore, schools actually have the autonomy to actually choose what kind of instrument they would like to use as the instrument of instruction. I think back in the 80s when I was growing up, it was pretty much uniform. Pretty much most schools would have used the recorder, and then now some of them use the harmonica, some of them use keyboards, some of them use the iPad, some of them have got like electronic music studios. So I think that's great. But yeah, just to answer the question, it's, you know, like when I talked about 40 children blowing on the soprano recorder at the same time in the classroom, that was really the kind of stereotype that I was trying to break in a way. And I think, yeah, recorder rewrite itself, it really combines a lot of compositional techniques, improvisational techniques, kind of games, exercises, fooling around, accidental sounds, all these things. I wanted to work them into the composition so that kind of like through restraint or collaborative restraint in a way, we could produce something that kind of makes sense and was quite musical in the end. Yeah. So also kind of like playing with certain tropes in experimental music where being unskilled or deliberately amateurish was you know, could be part of a way of producing music.
We have a related question there. If you can talk about some of the artists and musicians who you look to for inspiration.
Yeah, I generally tend to gravitate towards avant-garde music, experimental music. And I think especially after getting back, you know, into modular synthesizers, I've just been listening to so much crazy avant-garde music that's I think to many people quite unlistenable. But yeah, the groundbreaking stuff, it's always going to be interesting for me. Like I you know, the classics, John Cage, Stockhausen, Pierre Henry, Yoko Ono. I think actually a lot of Fluxus artists, like I mentioned, which is actually also one of the reasons why I chose Backwards Buff and Parts and Labor. I think both works are quite New Yorky. You know what I'm talking about. Even going back to, like, you know, in pop music or rock music, Sonic Youth, Glenn Branca, Talking Heads, bands. I generally like musicians who try to make non-music, or artists who try to make non-art. Or even when my favorite painters, for example, would be, you know, people like Agnes Martin, Raul de Keza. I don't know whether you know, but Raul de Keza is, yeah, I mean, a painter's painter, but I think he also deliberately painted in a very, he plays with a lot of things. He plays with perspective, he plays with like looking unskilled. And it's just got that balance totally right, where part of the painting is pulling you in, and then part of it is kind of like resisting and pushing you out because it wants to be ugly. Yeah, a lot of kind of, yeah, I like it when artists are a little bit difficult in a way, when they're just like, yeah, where there's something in the work that draws you in, but at the same time, maybe it's still got a level of impenetrability or mystery to it.
That's interesting, the balance between music for everybody and
being really insular in a way. Yeah, I also gravitate a lot towards like outsider music. It's just like weirdos, people that, you know, we don't necessarily know about.
There's a comment from the audience also about punk too, and embracing the amateur,
yeah,
and that
absolutely.
resistance and amateurism. And I mean, I will probably get criticized for calling punk naive, but there's like a purposeful naivete and joy and enthusiasm that goes back and forth between the almost like the resistance through the amateurism, or lack exactly. of easy skill balance then with I don't know, the joy of it.
Yeah, I think or whatever. Yeah, punk or minimalism. I think in a sense because with punk, we've got the saying, 3 chords, you've got a song. And I mean, when you go into like avant-garde music, it gets even more extreme. It's like people sustaining a whole tone for like 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Few niblock, it's just
It's a whole nother level of resistance.
yeah. I think it comes down to, with punk, maybe a little bit more about attitude, about like replacing virtuosity with attitude. But I guess also like virtuosity, yeah, it's really one thing that I look at a lot as well, because like I said, I really don't come from that kind of environment where I'm super proficient at anything. So it's if anything, I think the value of my art practice is that I'm kind of like a semi-outsider, with just like one foot in the art world, one foot in the music world, and just trying to do kind of slightly quirky things from my perspective. Yeah.
Between the two. So for our last minute, I'll share the last question. If you, what are you working on right now? Or what's exciting to you, or do you have anything up on the horizon that we should look for?
Doing a lot of research, I would say. How am I going to summarize this? Because I'm actually working on a kind of a really large project that I could spend easily 1 or the next 10 years working on, and it's got a lot to do with archival material again, looking back into the past for inspiration, but also kind of how it connects to the present. Just reading a lot also about of sort of getting back into some of the theory that I was reading a little bit earlier, Mark Fisher, capitalist realism, ontology, and trying to think about, it just kind of makes sense for me personally. I guess also something to do with very, very tumultuous political times, and with the pandemic and the climate crisis, and just trying to make sense of how things from the past connect to the present. And I think for me, what's generally very interesting for me now is like looking into trying to think about the future as some kind of as a future, as a vision, as an unrealized vision that haunts us from the future.
That sounds like
which is kind of different from the kind of Derridian ontology, but yeah, that's kind of where my head is now. And to do, and then kind of like looking into a little bit into like Singaporean or Southeast Asian history, and seeing how these kinds of like non-Western histories overlap with post Second World War Western history, as well as histories in music technology, for example. With synthesizers, the stuff that Moog and Buchla were putting out in the 60s, and then all the way into computer music with granular synthesis in the 90s, and so much so much to chew into, but broadly speaking.
Are you, out of personal curiosity, are you looking at Mark's sound works, that one exhibition you did at Showroom in particular, or more reading his writings? Yeah,
I did my MA at Goldsmiths. I did an oral and visual cultures course under Kojo Ashton, and then Mark Fisher came on for a couple of years, I think, when Kojo was on leave, if I'm not wrong. So I never had a chance to study under Mark, but I was reading the K-Punk blog, his K-Punk blog, in the 2000s. So yeah, I was already kind of familiar with his work, and but I have to be honest also, I think just within the last 2 years, it's been quite difficult for me, it's like emotionally, and it's difficult for me to kind of talk about this as well, but
It's okay.
to read about Mark and his writing on depression especially, I think also as someone whom I've never met, but as somebody who is just so voracious and so eloquent and really analytical and providing so much great analysis on pop culture, on the stuff that I was into. It's just something that for me is it's just really intimate.
Well, we'll all be watching out for what comes out of all of your research.
I'll keep you informed.
Song-Ming, thank you again for spending this time with us, and to everyone who's attended. And I'll remind everyone that you can see Song-Ming's exhibition on the High Line from dusk until the park closes every day through April 28th, and then in the Asia Society Triennial through June 27th here in New York. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk more soon.
Thanks, Melanie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.